might just give it a minute or so before we formally kick off. But did just want to say thank you, everyone, for taking the time today. Certainly appreciate. At the moment, it's a lot of time and a lot of demand on everybody's time and trying to solve problems. Basically, getting along with normal business, but with all the other stuff that's going on at the moment, and maybe starting to feel like this might not be a few months of different life. It might actually be a bit different. So look, with that, I did just want to say that this work from home wellness series was put together in response to some of the conversations we were having with our clients. A lot of them were HR managers and small business owners saying, Employment Hero, how can you help us work with our team and basically get better prepared to solve these problems where we're struggling. We got through the first round, but we're midway through the next year, and it's September now, so it's ongoing. So how do you help us? How can you help us? Employment Hero is all about making employment easier and more rewarding. So today is a big part of that. The key stats, and this is probably the biggest headline that prompted today. So Lifeline had its busiest day ever only a week or two ago, with 3,300 calls on the 3rd of August, which I think is a really big call to say that, hey, if you're kind of struggling at the moment, that you're not the exception, it's almost the rule. And there are a lot of things going on at the moment. Melbourne's almost a record breaker now with lockdown days. We see that there's record low wage growth in Australia. There's over $290 billion now in government funding. So we are looking at kind of a new normal. Pleasingly, we can see that 53% of employees rate their work life, 53% of employees rate their work life average to very poor. But this is the pleasing stat, and this is part of today, is that 63% rate their employer's commitment to well-being as being good or excellent. We're having conversations on the other side of that statistic to say we're running out of ideas, please help us. And that's what we really is forming today. So with that, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Chris Marr, founder and CEO of Sonder, as well as Dr. Jamie Phillips, who is the medical director and remote medicine physician at Sonder. A little bit about the business and the depth of expertise, I suppose, that we have today. So Sonder is a leading Australian wellbeing and safety company which services around 400,000 members. They're accredited by the Australian Council on Healthcare Standards. Sonder's solution is tech-driven. It's a platform which supports 24/7 safety and gives access to medical and health experts. Chris Marr has dedicated his life to serving others, previously serving 20 years as an Army officer, including 10 years as a leader and commander in the Special Forces. His role at Sonder is to lead the commercial strategy and growth of the company, both domestically and internationally. He is committed to addressing the world's burgeoning health crisis by disrupting the way people get help. Chris, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Ray. Appreciate you having us today. Thanks.
And Dr. Jamie Phillips. Dr. Jamie Phillips is a specialist rural and remote physician with advanced specialist training in emergency medicine, who has spent his career pushing medicine to the extreme. A former Royal Navy commando and Australian Army medical officer, Jamie has spent 20 years as an embedded doctor and medicine commander within elite military units, tasked with providing advanced point of view wounding care on combat and counter-terrorism operations around the globe. He has learned very early on to look at problems in a different way and seek new approaches to medical support. Dr. Jamie Phillips, thank you for your time today.
That's great. Thanks, Ray. Looking forward to it.
Look, for today, guys, we had a little bit of agenda, but I think what we were actually having a conversation offline, and we recognize that this might be a really opportunity to do a bit more of a fireside chat rather than death by PowerPoint. And with that, given all of the work that Chris and Dr. Jamie are doing day to day, I feel like there's the opportunity to really tackle into their expertise and experience over what they've seen, certainly over the past 12, 24 months, and how we might be able to bake some of their lessons into our individual businesses. So with that, Chris, I might hand over to you and actually get you to share a little bit of your experiences and see how we can help the attendees for today.
Thanks, Ray, and to everyone that's joined the call, thanks very much for having us and for spending your lunchtime with us. Ray, you touched a bit on our sort of military background, which is not particularly common across the business, happily, but it does provide somewhat of a foundation for why we started the business. And the military background is shared by my co-founders. Happily, we're now standing on the shoulders of giants across the business, which is sort of 150 strong or thereabouts. We've just got the most extraordinary team that now exists across a variety of disciplines, as you'd well imagine. But if you go back to that sort of start point, if we think about where we were sort of 5 years ago, Craig, Pete and I, my co-founders, we wanted to take a little bit of service with us into private enterprise. And we set off 5 years ago or so with a pretty big ambition. It was to get help, physical help by someone's side anywhere on earth in less than 20 minutes. So as you might imagine, it's a pretty grand ambition. Our hypothesis was that help would manifest as a safety-related requirement. And as such, by setting out on this ambition to physically help people, it saw us go and recruit the assistance of ex and off-duty police and ambulance officers in almost all jurisdictions. And these were people that were highly available, they're highly trained, they existed in these local geographies, and they understood local complexities, jurisdictional issues, legalities, cultural nuances, all these sorts of things. And importantly, they were highly trained. So if we could wrap technology around that group of extraordinary people, we can make it of that talent available at scale to people. So we went off with that ambition, and our first contract was with a business which I'm sure you would know called Allianz, a global insurance company, and we used it in order to support a huge number of their policyholders. And the sort of long story condensed into short form is that over the course of the first few years of the business, we were largely operating in the university market. It was with a safety proposition, and it's all going swimmingly well. We partnered with more than half of the Australian universities. That was giving us incredible density of demand. The density was localized to particular geographies associated with the universities. That meant we could increase supply side economics and liquidity and reduce marginal cost of service and scale the business, all those great sort of and wonderful things. But it's not the successes that I really want to sort of talk about today. It's really the failures and what we've learned as a result of some of the missteps. And the first misstep came in that initial hypothesis that helping people would manifest as a requirement for a physical safety related use case. And it turns out we were quite wrong. In the course of helping those first several hundreds of thousands of people, the business, being very heavily exposed to the university market, suffered a pretty significant jolt come COVID. When the borders closed, I think on the 16th of March last year, so did the international student volumes into the country, which is one of the major supporting structures of the university and education sector within Australia. So that really saw Sonder's revenues really fall off a cliff, unfortunately. We was at a point where we were scaling significantly, had a couple of hundred staff, had a massive burn rate in the business. For anyone that sort of understands how tech businesses work, so it was costing us a lot. But the nuance was we had hundreds of thousands of people to continue to support. So no money in the front end, but heaps of people to continue to support. And we're supporting them in a pretty important circumstance. It's their personal safety. So it was important we didn't drop the ball. So what it forced on us, and this moves to the evolution of the business, whereas I want to spend the time and the mistakes, is it forced us to look really critically at our data, look critically at why people were coming to us, and therein lay the insight that has developed the business to what it is now, and what sees Jamie and I, on behalf of the business, sitting here today, talking to you about well-being. Because when we looked at that data structure, and we looked at a pretty detailed level, we found out that about 65% of everything that we were dealing with on a daily basis was mental health related. Of course, you could argue that we were, mental health, psychological safety, ergo safety proposition held. But if we were sort of true with ourselves, it wasn't quite the case. We set off on this ambition about helping people in the physical safety realm. The reality was it was psychological safety that was the predominant use case in the market, to the tune of 65%. If we looked at the data a little bit differently, instead of trying to bucket a use case into a particular aspect, being medical or safety or mental health as just three examples, if we looked at it a little bit more open-mindedly, we found that more than half the time, I think about 59% of the time, it's more than two things combined. So safety and medical and mental health related issues, well-being issues, they are intrinsically linked, and you can't effectively separate them out. So where in the first throes of starting up a business, we sort of headlong into a safety related value proposition, it meant that in this new world that we were facing in the back end of COVID with collapsed revenues and a pretty challenging circumstance for the business, that we had to orientate our services very substantially. So what we did, I read the newspaper just about every day, as I'm sure many of the people in the room do. And on this particular day, which was about sort of April last year, read an article about, it was Brad Banducci, the CEO of Woolworths in the media. And he was talking about Woolworths as an organisation having recently been designated national critical level infrastructure. They've got, of course, supply chains that are trying to keep toilet paper on the shelves and food in people's fridges. They've got a hugely, at the time, and perhaps even still a hugely overworked workforce that numbers about 250,000 people. They're in every demographic community throughout the country. It exists across sort of white collar and commercial teams in Woolworths, supply chain logistics, people stacking shelves, people in the deli, people at the checkout, people in back of house doing user experience and design for Woolies X, click and collect. Like, it's just extraordinary organisation. And what Brad was noticing, or what he'd sort of motioned in the AFR this day back in April last year, was the impact that all these stresses, these unforecasted stresses, were having on the organisation. And it triggered us, having just looked at our data and thinking, okay, hey, there's something to learn here about well-being, and sort of opening the aperture about how we care for people. And then reading Brad Banducci's comments in the AFR about the broad spectrum of challenges that people were facing, became evident to us that there was a really significant use case that was being undertreated. The long story short, in the next evolution of Sonder's history, at least on the commercial front, was I ended up organising for a 30-minute call with Brad on a Sunday whilst he was walking his dog, put to him a proposition that Sonder might be able to help by taking a much more holistic view of the organisation. And 5 months later, we contracted to support the 250,000 people at Woolworths with a holistic offering, which I'm going to ask Jamie to speak to get into the detail of what it is, the insights that are provided, because that's where the real story is. On the back of that, there's still a bit of resolution to occur, noting those revenues that collapsed from us. So we opened up a business in the government area, where we contract with the Department of Defence and New South Wales government. Recently, we've been asked to support preventative mental health frameworks for the New South Wales population, for those in mandatory isolation during coronavirus. And part of all that is just moving on a journey that's transitioned our business from being a physical safety business to being a holistic wellbeing business, and ultimately a healthcare company. So I might pause there with just the context about, how it is we're sitting in the room here. I think some of the more interesting things and the insights are going to come from Dr. Jamie, who we're thrilled to have in the business. He leads our member support, and of course the entire medical framework that sits at the core of the Sonder business now. And I'd encourage Jamie to speak about our Indigenous healthcare model, how we look at well-being from a completely, we think, unique lens. And ideally, we'd love to open up to questions at the back, if not provided the detail already, to give you some sort of tips on at least the data that we're seeing, how that correlates to some actions that leaders can take. So
thanks, Chris. And just before Jamie, or for either of you, really, a key term that you mentioned there, Chris, was psychological safety. I'd be keen on what your interpretation is of psychological safety, and why it's such a key problem, I suppose, that businesses should be looking at as a way to help their employees.
Yeah.
Do you want to tackle that one, Jamie?
Yeah, I think what we'll do, if it's all right for you, we'll talk about the way we approach wellbeing, and I think that may well answer your question, because it's very easy for me to give you a succinct sentence, but actually I need to put it in the round, really, if that's okay. I noticed somebody else had their hand up for a question. Do you want to answer that now, Ray? Or I think Stephanie had her hand up, but
Might have missed that one. For any questions, please do pop them in the chat, and I'll make sure they get addressed throughout the session.
No worries. Okay, so I mean, Chris, thanks, mate. You've done, as always, a great explanation of where we've gone to, and particularly where we've learned from our mistakes, which is a key kind of part of our business, having a growth mindset at the center of what we do. And it was actually learning from my mistakes in healthcare that got me to Sonder. So, you know, I did the usual thing as a clinician. I became increasingly subspecialized, more and more subspecialized, more and more focused. I did general practice, then I did emergency medicine, then I did rural emergency medicine, then just retrieval. And then I realized that I was missing the point, that actually the point is taking a step back and looking at the whole situation. And just as Sonder was going on that journey, I was going on that journey as well. And we connected and we realized that what we had to do was look at people truly holistically. Now, it's a word that's thrown around all the time, holistic well-being. But what does it actually mean? So for Sonder, what we use, we're mentored by an Indigenous health model from New Zealand called Wharitapa. What Wharitapa means is the house with 4 walls. And the way to think about it is that that house, that roof of that house, which is sheltering not just the individual, but their family, the community, their colleagues, the people they work with, and the people they care about are all sheltering under that roof. And each of those 4 walls is bearing the same load. No one is more important than the other. And if one of those walls is not maintained, or one of them becomes unstable, it doesn't matter how strong the other 3 are, the roof's going to fall down and it's going to crush not just the individual, but it's going to impact on everybody else. And so that's the way we look at it using Wharitapa. Each of the walls represent a key dynamic in your existence, but also your health and your well-being. First one is the physical health, the one that we give the most importance to in the Western world. But within our model, we don't give it the most importance, it's equal. The second one's psychological and mental health. Again, equally as important as physical health, but no more important than the others. The third is cultural or family, whānau. And the idea being that that's where are you coming from? Who are you related to? Who are your direct family, but who are your community? And who are your work family? Noting that we spend more time often with our work family than we do with our own family. And then also looking at culturally, what matters to you? What's important to you? Where are you going? What does the world mean to you? And how do you identify? And every single time we interact with a member, a person, we look at it in all 4 domains every single time. And then we stand alongside them and we help them unpack their problem, either using technology, using humans, or quite often a bit of both. And it's not about, my director of nursing talks about, it's not stitch and ditch, is it, Chris? We don't just say, yep, 90 seconds to get to the problem. There you go. That's the solution. And that's what I was seeing when I was working in ED. Someone would come to ED and they'd say, oh, I've got a physical problem. And because we were doing quite well, we'd ask them, they'd mention something mental health. We're like, no, you came for that. That's what you're here for. That's not what we need to do. And that's not what people need. People actually just need someone to listen to them, help them understand their problems, prioritize those problems, and then address them with somebody standing alongside them. And that's what we do at Sonder. We identify the problems. And as Chris said, over 65% of the time, what people present with is not the underlying problem or problems, but it takes time. You have to draw breath and you have to put yourself in the same position as the person you're talking to. And that's what Sonder means, isn't it, Chris? It's about understanding that everybody else's life is just as complex as your own. And actually, if you humble yourself and you flatten that power gradient as caregiver to care receiver, actually people start to tell you things that you didn't know about them, and they often didn't know. We unpack it, we identify the priorities, we see how they want to go, and then we guide them to the care that they need right then. Now, sometimes that can be reinforcing their existing support networks, whether that's their manager, their leader, their family, their friends, their GP, or their therapist. Alternatively, is they just don't understand the complexity. So what we do is say, give them a few touch points. And we talk about navigating the swamp of uncertainty, going back to mine and Chris's roots. And we go as a guide with them. We stand alongside them. We say, hey, look, we don't know where this journey is going to go, but we're always here for you. And we've got a whole team with us who know this swamp. It's hard going. Sometimes you're going to have to help me, and sometimes I'm going to have to help you. But it doesn't matter. And I'm going to be here till we get to the end of the journey. And you say to me, hey, Jamie, I don't need you anymore. I've got this, but I know where to find you. And it's the knowing where to find you, isn't it, Chris? That's our goal, is to lower the barrier for asking for help. And if you want to talk about what psychological safety is, I genuinely think it's that. It's that ability to feel safe, to trust the network around you, trust yourself to say, I don't know what to do here, but I know where to go to ask for help. Because that's the key. It's about humbling yourself and understanding whether you're an individual or you're a leader and say, I need help. I don't even know what it looks like, but that doesn't matter. I've got this big complex offering in front of me, but I'm just going to go to one point. If it's wrong, that's fine. We'll find our way there. Does that answer your question about how we do it?
Yeah, it's really great. Thank you, Jamie. Maybe a question around psychological safety. I know for Employment Hero, we work with a lot of small, medium-sized businesses, so anything between 20 and 200 staff. I'm wondering if you would call out, or if you would say that psychological safety or creating a culture of that in an organization is really it has to come from the top down, or whether or not it's something that can be bottom up, I suppose, is the other way of saying it. But yeah, kind of interested in your insights there.
I could give a wonderful politician answer, which is both, because it's actually about the leadership modeling that behavior. I'm a big fan of what we call the military mission command, which is where you say, this is what success looks like. I'm going to give you a safe area to do it. You do it how you think is best, because that's what we're learning working with our partners, is that leaders and managers know their people best. And actually, the most successful leaders that we see say, hey, look, I trust your judgment as a local leader. I'm going to give you the tools and the access and the reach to me if you need me. But I know you know your people and you know how to support them best. And if you don't, here's a whole bunch of people who are going to stand alongside you. And certainly one of the senior leaders within Woolworths, he, by his own admission, said he didn't really understand the demographic and he didn't really understand the problem that he was facing. But by working with us, he started to understand that actually our whole model is about empowering individuals, whether they're leaders or members or patients, and connecting the two and facilitating conversation. And he refers to Sonder now as his angel in his pocket. If he doesn't know what to do, he's always got a group of people to reach out to. And that's, for me, honestly, is the reason I get up. And that's the reason my team get up, is actually we are there to help people. So in answer, yes, the leader has to set the culture, but it's down at its grassroots level to say, look, it's okay to care. I'm not a mental health expert. No one's expecting me to be a psychologist, psychiatrist, doctor, nurse. But what I am going to do is care. I am going to support you. And I am interested in what your experience is.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jamie. And maybe just adding on to that, we've run a couple of presentations specifically on psychological safety, and an area that we've seen work really well is when senior managers, especially managers of teams, they're very comfortable exposing their own vulnerabilities and fears and starting to actually give a little bit away. You don't need to be that stoic figure. Obviously clarity on direction and making sure that you're creating a great environment, but one of the best ways you can do that is actually share some of your own vulnerabilities. And a conversation that we were having in preparation for today, and maybe what I can throw to you, Chris, is the idea that in an SME, often the HR manager or the person who is responsible for motivating teams hasn't necessarily been trained up for that space. So often it might be a payroll officer or finance or a business owner who's scaled up very quickly, and suddenly they're trying to figure out how to get their team to cope in really testing times. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I think it's an issue that we see everywhere, and I think as leaders, and I use the word leader as suggestive, not of a position, not of a title, but as the core fundamental that's driving the behavior of a person. So it exists irrespective of where you sit in an organization. I think as leaders, one of the core attributes to an effective leader is humility, but also empathy. And I think if you've got highly empathetic leaders in an organization, we'd all like to think that we do, then they're going to get down on the level with the person and empathize, and they're going to spend time, and that's necessary. What becomes the challenge then is to how do you then we probably all know that, and I'm sort of making this number up, so a little warning here, but a huge proportion of leaders' time is spent caring for people rather than running the business. And you could argue, I think very effectively, that those things are one and the same thing anyway. So the human capital and the leadership function and the pastoral care that you provide as a leader is running the business, but often often those things in a business are considered as sort of separate things. You've got your accountability and you've got your metrics and KPIs to achieve, and they don't relinquish. But then you may have some pretty significant human capital challenges to confront at the same time, and so they have to exist in unison. So I think if you can build structures that recognize that tension, I think that's where you're going to have really good effect. And we ultimately, most businesses are pretty sophisticated in their approach here, I think. And in recognition that they've got this huge variety of needs of their organization, different demographics, diverse demographics, maybe different locations that their organizations sort of frame around, means that they've built out a whole bunch of support frameworks that are probably sitting in silos. They're probably really effective at what they do and the little niche thing that they're built to achieve, but they're generally sitting in silos. They're sitting behind barriers that may be about stigma, maybe about access, maybe about recognition that I have a problem that I need to have dealt with. It may be that the barrier itself is the overwhelming complexity of the landscape of help that we've built ourselves. And if you were just to think across like the non-for-profit sector, and I noticed in your slide, even at the start, Ray, I think you had 5 or 6 different emergency hotlines to call. And I mean, that just in and of itself is a challenge, yeah? Because if you're in a moment of overwhelm and you think, well, do I go to Lifeline or 000 or Black Dog or to my GP or to Kids Helpline or to Men's Line, or which one is it that I go to? And that's just for crisis. If you then open the aperture to talk a little bit more about your general health and well-being, about preventative actions, ICBT, I mean, the list is extraordinary. And so I think part of the function of leadership is to help, I'm stealing Jamie's word here, but help navigate people through that complexity, understand through empathy what the problem is, understand where you've got a skill and where that skill might be best applied with someone else, and then help direct that person to the most effective means to resolve their issue.
I think it's fascinating, Chris, that Sonder has found success in baking in a more Indigenous cultural approach into Western society, and that's actually where things are getting simplified and where your results are coming through. I'm interested in what led you to, look sort of outside the cultural norms and see where the overlap is.
Do you want me to answer that, Chris?
I was going to say, I think Jamie's in a better position for this one.
Yeah, so as like most things, it came as a good conversation over a glass of wine, actually. And with myself and my nursing director, we realised this was a problem. And we realised deep in our heart that the traditional Western health and wellbeing model really wasn't fit for purpose anymore. We'd both been in it within 20 years. And that's a very confronting thing to realise, that, what I've set my life to and what I've done really isn't fit for purpose anymore. And we had this conversation. Now, Kimmy is a very proud Māori woman and a nurse. My background's in Australian, Papua New Guinean and African Indigenous health. And during our conversation, we were saying, well, how do you solve this problem? What we realised, and Kimmy says it brilliantly, that how can a Maori woman from New Zealand and ostensibly a colonial British doctor, military officer from the UK, meet in a tech company in Sydney and realise that the problem is exactly the same, and our experience through multiple Indigenous communities realise that actually they truly understand health and well-being. They understand connection. They understand connection for you as an individual, to what matters to you, to your family, or to your community, but also deeper than that, to where are you going? And that was when we started looking at Indigenous models. And Kimmy said, well, I've got this great one by Sir Mason Jury called Whare Tapawha. And we looked at it and we unpacked, and we said, that absolutely nails it. Now, it doesn't give you the solution, but what it does is give you a mental model and gives you a very simple, applicable framework that we apply not just to the human interaction with my staff, but to the technology, to Chris's business strategy, and to how we engage with people. And as you say, it's simple, but that's its beauty. It's simple, it's transferable, and the key element it has at its center is cultural safety. About caregivers taking ourselves off our massive pedestal, parking my massive ego, Chris, and flattening the power gradient. And that's what we try to do with technology, is flatten the power gradient.
Something you mentioned there, Jamie, was around it might not be perfect, and keen to maybe explore that a little bit further, because I wonder if sometimes the inner engineers in all of us are looking for the most perfect solution and won't do anything until that perfect thing comes along. Whereas an alternative approach is just to give something a crack and get started, and any step in the right direction is moving. Is moving. Interested in kind of your thoughts there. I admire, I suppose, how not brave is the wrong word, but it was really like a really different idea. And look, it's not perfect, but the business is going to get behind it and give it a crack. And you've actually seen a lot of benefit from that.
We have. I'm going to give it to Chris, because Chris and the team, the founders, have taught me genuinely so much about this, that if I spent my whole time doing the due diligence that I love to do, we'd never get anywhere, would we, Chris? And so I'll hand to Chris about how he answers that with the business, and then I may comment on it from a healthcare perspective.
Yeah, look, I think context is really important here, Ray. To not make not too fine a point on it, but last year we were in a hugely challenging financial position, as many businesses were. But we were a business that had built at a strategic level, had decided to build our commercial foundation on the education sector, which was all sound logic. It was to underwrite infrastructure in each geography, export that around the world, then move into adjacent markets, and we'd conquer all. And so it required instant and immediate change. And in circumstances like that, I think you're forced to make really educated bets. There's some risk in that, but there's also risk in inaction, or to take too long to make decisions. And I think the important thing, if you're going to move quickly, try and understand the lead indicators that are identifying what success. Are you getting closer to success, to your point before? And conversely, the indicators that mean that perhaps you might not be in the right direction, and have the humility and presence of mind, the awareness to be able to quickly adapt. And if you've got those aspects and an extraordinary team, and we certainly do at Sonder, and I'm sure for everyone on the call, I'd like to think that you'd think the same of your organisation, then you're armed with a pretty good foundation to change. What I would say, again on the point, is the landscape is changing every day. The reality is that building a framework that's sort of perfect may be perfect for the day you build it, and it won't be perfect tomorrow. It's iterating so quickly. The needs of people are changing so rapidly. I feel like I'm a pretty blessed person. We live in a lovely house. My wife's a Qantas pilot, so she's been stood down. We schooling kids from home. These were pressures that our family hadn't anticipated, before COVID. There was anyway, I won't go in too much into that, but the challenges, the pressures, the changes that are facing all of us, I don't think can be separated in that nice, neat way. And forgive me for being on the soapbox, but I've seen a terrific question in the chat. I think is that from April, talking about whare tapa whā and the separation between work, and traditionally there's some desire within organisations to try and separate a well-being or a health or a safety issue from a work-related issue to a personal-related issue. I hope I've got that right, April. And I think they're just inextricably linked. I mean, the fact that I'm having this conversation from my dining room table with the kids, the horsey behind me, and I'm sure everyone else is doing the same thing, means that they're inextricably linked. You just cannot separate these things. And I think if you want to have a good and healthy organisation that cares for people and really, put your money where your mouth is about the importance of human capital, then you need to take that really broad lens.
The April's comment was actually following on from a question that I had earlier, which is like, can an HR manager in this very personal space go too far into it, and where are the lines? I'm kind of interested in further exploring like the blurring of it, and what are your thoughts on that specific for an HR manager who isn't sure? Is it okay to even just say to their team, hey, we're going to put a whole bunch of initiatives together. We're keen to get this stuff right. We don't know where the lines are, so please come back to us and give us feedback so that we know what is most comfortable for you as the team. Is that something that you would see as positive?
Look, I think generally positive, but again, it's that awareness, the self-awareness about when you might be when you might be encroaching on someone's, where they're not comfortable with you doing that. That's one of the reasons of many others that Sonder is independent. So at Woolworths and Commonwealth Bank and PwC, a variety of other partners we have, we are completely and known to be completely independent. It's important that people can come to Sonder and know that a discussion is confidential, that there's not a data loop that goes back to the organization. We do provide data sets that talk about that talk about in an aggregated, correlated, but anonymized way to give indications about the health of an organization, because it's important that people, leaders, get access to that data. Because at the moment, the most of the tools that we've got as leaders is stated preference data pulse surveys. Yeah, so you get once a month or once a quarter, you get the pulse survey, and you respond as you do, and maybe you declare all the things, maybe you don't. But either way, that's in statistics called stated preference data, and it's helpful. But what's most helpful is to then correlate that information with the reality, the revealed preference data, and by having a really good lens on what's stated, what's revealed, trying to draw some sort of inferences from those things, I think is where the power exists. So it's not to suggest that the HR managers shouldn't get involved, or at least have that open door and make people feel comfortable. That's crucial. But I don't think that we as leaders should expect that that's going to uncover all the issues that may be there, for all the reasons that would be obvious to all of us, I'm sure.
On the, you mentioned the data security and kind of de-identified nature of how things get reported. I wonder if there's a lot of individuals on the call who see that their employers are putting together a whole bunch of awesome tools and initiatives, but are perhaps scared or feel vulnerable to actually be transparent with how they're feeling. They get the pulse survey. It's like, I'm going to say what my employer thinks I should say, not how I actually feel, because I don't want this to come back to me and have an awkward conversation with my manager. Do you have any kind of insights or thoughts that you might say to that individual who's feeling a little bit nervous about revealing their inner thoughts?
Jamie, do you have any examples that come to mind for you, mate?
Yeah, I think it's about starting away. Individual leaders know their business, and I think sometimes they produce these pulse surveys because they feel they should, rather than saying, this is something I really genuinely need to learn about my people. And it's exactly as Chris said, we often hear people tell us, they'll say, oh, I know my boss mentioned this, I didn't really want to say anything. And it's not normally because they're scared of them. They just can see how hard their boss is working. They can see how hard their leaders are working. And we hear this all the time. We some of our partners, people are clocking out and staying at work because they trust their leader. But then when the leader asks them, do you feel overworked? They're like, no, I don't want to say anything because I can see how hard they're working. What we find out is by being humble and by saying, look, do you know what? We haven't got all the answers, but we're here for you. We're interested. We want to help. And this is confidential. People tell us what the reality is. Now, as an individual data point, that's interesting. When we aggregate it across an organization or by certain demographics within an organization, that's when we start to see the real changes, isn't it, Chris? And that's when we start to see where the real problems are. And because it's de-identified and it's aggregated, what we can then do is go to a partner, a business, and say, hey, and I always say with my team, my goal every single day is to teach a business something about the business they don't know. And what we want to do, and we do that in a kind of compassionate way, we'll say, hey, look, your staff are telling you this, but actually in reality, I think this is what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and this is what they want to happen. And going back to what we do at an individual level, we then encourage them to broker a conversation where, going to your point, where they're humble. And you start with humility and you say, hey, look, it sounds like I haven't got it right. Now, can you tell me and reverse mentor how to do this better? And that's what we really want.
Great. And would you say, I'm interested in your thoughts here, where the current tension, I suppose, over the past 12, 24 months with COVID and all the rest of it, would you see that that's certainly accelerated the development of this wellbeing space and industry, and perhaps more organizations are looking to solve these problems? Is there almost like a little bit of a silver lining to where we're at the moment?
100%. I think we've reached a tipping point now. This is not a new problem. And people have always said, yeah, we know it's there, but there was no impetus to get it done. And certainly if you look at the data coming from the King's Funds in the UK, they've just published their retrospective analysis, big cohort study looking at the mental health impact of COVID in the UK. Not directly applicable, but broadly applicable to the Australian experience. And what they found is that disproportionately mental health relating to COVID is affecting younger generations. It is disproportionately affecting people without a higher education, without a university degree, and disproportionately affecting females. And that's what we're starting to see. We're starting to see people come forward who previously would never have come forward. And they're just saying the most common words we see on our IT system is stress, burnouts, uncertainty, fatigue, exhausted. And then I noticed it was great by Amy, no blurring of lines, no safe space away from work.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Guys, we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'd encourage you all, as any questions that have come up through the session, please do pop them in, and I'll do my best to make sure we address them all before the time's up. There is a question here from Theo, who does work in the corporate sector and was keen to understand how Sonder offers support through the app. Is it directed only towards leaders and HR, or is it something that you actually address with the employees directly? And while I ask you to answer that, I will pop up contact details as well, should any of the attendees want to reach out directly.
Thanks, Ray. And Theo, for your question there, mate. Look, we support the entire organisation. So, you know, for Woolworths, as an example, I mentioned them a few times. There's 220 or 250,000 members that we support there. There's a whole bunch of different demographics, as I sort of touched on before, from people working in the retail, like in the stores, through to supply chain logistics, the leadership, the corporate leadership, the group leadership. And I think, therefore, sort of answering the question about how's the support provided through the app, it's by using a really sophisticated persona driver that sits at the back end of the technology. I mean, on this call right now, I can't see everyone's faces, but I can see Ray and Jamie and myself, and of course the slideshow. And so I think for most organizations, you'd maybe see Ray, Jamie and I as a single persona. We're sort of white, middle-aged men. But what they might not know is that, you know, I've got 2 kids, Jamie's got four kids. We live in different areas. Ray, I'm not sure of your partner status, and also not asking, but it will be different to that, no doubt. In some respect, we're all very different, of course. And the reality, when you dig below the surface of persona sort of theory, is that you don't see one persona here because we're 3 middle-aged white guys. We're 3 different personas. And so the nuance of the Sonder technology is that it understands how people engage with content, what sort of challenges that they are facing, such that the way that we engage with the person is relevant and meaningful for them at an individual level. By being relevant and meaningful for those people throughout the course of a relationship with these people, as we do at Sonder, that has the net effect of building trust, lowering the barriers to entry, inviting people to engage with nurses at the touch of a button, doctors, psychologists, counsellors, whatever it is. It's on demand, not sort of press the button, wait 3 weeks for your appointment. And so that's how we do it. It takes a really nuanced view of each individual, and then tries to build a bespoke experience for them. And that's how we tackle it.
Thank you, Chris. I'm not sure how I feel about being called middle-aged, but
yeah, sorry, I loved you in a bit.
Thank you so much for your time. For those that for those in the audience, the agenda, I should have kind of mentioned this at the start. This space is so polarizing, and not everything is going to hit home. The real agenda is, if one key thing or one comment was made today that sparks an idea, that's kind of where we want to get to. At the end of today, we'll wrap up the recording and send it all to you in an email, along with direct links to both Jamie and Chris. Please do treat that email as an invitation to continue the conversation, both with Employment Hero, Sonder, and all 3 of us on personal levels. Happy to address and help where we can. For everyone, I started with this real test on time pressure and all of that at the moment. So I commend you all for taking 45 minutes to an hour out of your day and dedicating that time to upskilling and learning a little bit more. With that, I will just quickly close on the session that we have tomorrow. This is closing our work from home wellness series. We've got Improving Your Physical Health at Home with Matthew Green. He's the CEO of Body Guide, and he's also an author of I'm Sick of Being Soy. He's very recently published the book, and there's a couple of goodies to come off the back of that. But with Chris and Jamie, I thank you so much for your time. And yeah, it was really interesting to have the chat.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ray. And thanks to everyone on the call. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, guys.